There is a bench at the end of the human table. Not a chair. The Drevathi Senate builds their seating in graduated tiers, each member sovereignty assigned a configuration appropriate to its standing: curved benches for observer delegations, high-backed chairs for full members, carved thrones for hereditary seats. When the Earth mission was granted observer status, 31 years ago, we were assigned the last bench at the end of the leftmost delegation table. Stone, no cushion, no armrest. A long flat thing, cold in winter and cold in summer, because the Drevathi climate protocols favor the cold, and nobody ever asked us what we preferred. I sat on that bench for the first time, 17 years ago, 3 days into my posting. My predecessor handed me the translation earpiece, pointed me to the seat, and told me the only thing I needed to know about the job: don't leave it empty. I learned quickly what she meant, learned it the way you learn things in political chambers, which is by watching what everyone else is watching and understanding, eventually, that they are not watching the speaker, they are watching the seat. The Drevathi Senate met every 12 days. Full session, 6 hours minimum, sometimes 10. Observer delegations were not required to attend every session, only the ones designated as primary concern. But the Earth mission attended every session. Every single one. Someone from our mission was on that bench when the Soreth Accords were signed, and when they collapsed. Someone was on that bench when the hegemony of the Third Reach voted to dissolve itself, rather than accept the Senate's taxation framework. Someone was on that bench the day the Vethrani delegate choked on a formal objection and had to be carried from the chamber by 2 colleagues while the session recorder kept reading, because the session recorder never stops. The Senate did not acknowledge us. That was not unusual. Observer delegations are rarely acknowledged. We were entitled to submit written questions at the close of session and to request the floor on matters that directly concerned Earth, and those requests were, in my 17 years, denied 11 times and granted once, for approximately 40 seconds. But we were there. Every session, without exception, someone from the Earth mission sat on that bench and listened, and took notes, and held the seat. I stopped thinking of it as a posting after a while. I started thinking of it as a watch. The Declaration of Exclusion was introduced on the 19th session of the new administrative cycle. I had been warned it was coming, not officially, but the kind of warning that travels in corridors and antechambers, in the way that a junior aide from a member sovereignty doesn't quite meet your eyes when you pass. I told Ambassador Voss on the morning of the session. He listened with his hands folded on his desk and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "How many of us are attending today?" I told him, 4, the standard rotation. He looked at the window. "Let's make it 7, he said. I didn't ask why. I had been in these chambers long enough to understand the arithmetic. When a council reads a declaration, it reads to whoever is present. The more bodies in the room, the more weight the moment carries. Voss wanted 7 witnesses, not because 7 could stop anything, but because 7 would remember it exactly, and because the Senate would know we had come in force to hear what they had to say about us. We took our seats at 10 past the opening bell, 7 of us, which was more than the bench comfortably held. Kalin sat on the edge. I could feel him balancing. The session opened with secondary business, trade allocation adjustments, a dispute over corridor licensing in the outer reach. I rendered it all into the earpiece with the part of my brain that runs on its own by now, while the rest of me watched the chamber. 412 delegates. The tiered seating curved up and around the chamber floor in a full circle, and from the bench you could see every delegation at once. I had spent 17 years reading those faces. I knew which delegations argued and which ones listened. I knew which aides passed notes and which ones wrote nothing because they had already been told how to vote. Today they were all watching the bench. The session recorder rose, which is the standard form, and the chamber quieted in the way that chambers quiet when everyone already knows what is about to be said. The recorder is a small Drevathi official named Oveth Saral. I had rendered his voice into English more times than I could count. He had a precise, uninflected delivery that the Drevathi prize, no weight on any word, everything equal. He read the preamble. By order of the Drevathi Sovereign Senate, in full administrative session, the observer designation held by the mission of Earth is hereby declared void. The seat assigned to said mission, hereby ordered vacated. No announcement, no hand raised. He simply rose. Kalen rose beside him, then the others, one at a time, in the way that people rise when they have been waiting for a signal they could not name in advance but recognized the moment it arrived. I was last. I pushed the translation earpiece onto the bench. 7 of us walked from the chamber floor in a single column, while Oveth Soral continued reading behind us. His voice followed us to the doors. I could still hear him when we reached the antechamber. Then the doors closed. The corridor was cold the way those corridors are always cold. One of the junior attachés made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Voss did not slow his pace. We did not speak until we were outside the building. I stood in the square outside the Senate and looked back at the structure. The Drevathi build for permanence. Stone that looks like it was never quarried, but simply arrived, fully formed, from the geological record. The Senate had occupied that building for 240 years. They had ceded member sovereignties and expelled them, rewritten the administrative charter 11 times, consumed 4 other governing bodies by incorporation, and outlasted 2 through sheer inertia. We had been sitting in there for 31 years. I thought about the bench, the stone, the cold of it. I thought about my predecessor handing me the earpiece without looking back, and I thought about her predecessor before her, and the one before that, and the one who had sat down on that bench for the first time, when the wood was still new, if it had ever been new, if the Drevathi had not simply cut it from stone that had already been waiting. The declaration would finish being read to an empty seat. Oveth Soral's voice would reach the end of the operative clause, the grounds, the effective date, and then the session recorder would sit. The chamber recorder would log the time. The entry would be made, seat vacated. Except we hadn't vacated it. We had stood up. Those are different things. Anyone who has spent time in political chambers knows the difference. To vacate is to comply. To stand and walk out before the order is finished is something the Charter has no category for. We were not subject to the declaration because we had not been present to receive it. We had left in the middle of it. I don't know who first understood that in the chamber. I know that by the time our legal team filed the objection 4 days later, 3 member delegations had already privately inquired about the basis. The session recorder's log showed the order read to completion. The attendance log showed the bench empty before the reading ended. Which was true? Both were true. The Senate spent 9 weeks on that question. Which record governed? Whether a declaration of exclusion required the presence of the excluded to take effect. Whether the Earth mission's departure mid-reading constituted compliance or refusal. The ambassador from the Vethrani seat, a woman named Sorel Khan who had never spoken to any of us directly, stopped me in the outer corridor of the administrative annex during the 6th week of deliberation. She looked at me for a moment, in the way that people look at you when they are revising something they thought they understood. She said, "How long were you actually going to keep sitting there?" I thought about 31 years. I thought about the bench, the cold. The earpiece passed from hand to hand. "Longer than this," I said. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she walked back into the deliberation chamber. The Senate restored observers standing, 11 weeks after the declaration. The grounds were procedural. They did not say they had made a mistake. I sat down, and the cold came up through the stone the way it always had, and I put the earpiece in, and I waited for the session to open.